I've pretty much been building and running companies now for more than 20 years.
This guy is Anthony Pompliano. He went from making $50,000 a year to being worth over $100 million. Last month, I went to his office and asked him to teach me everything he knows about investing and building multi-billion-dollar companies.
I think that I've probably started my first companies when I was like 12 or 13 years old.
What have you figured out about building wealth that others haven't?
If you think of most of the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, they're kind of like old school ideas.
If you were back in college today, what would be some of the businesses that you would think about potentially starting?
But I actually think in college, the single most important thing that you can do is...
What do you think most entrepreneurs get wrong when trying to scale their business?
There's a lot of founders who dream, but they don't have goals.
What do you think are a few traits that separate these hyper-successful billionaires from the average person?
There's a very interesting kind of dynamic of like...
Anthony, you've lived in a war zone, met and interviewed some of the world's wealthiest people, built and sold companies, invested in hundreds of businesses, some of now which are worth billions and billions of dollars. What have you figured out about building companies and building wealth that others haven't?
I don't think it's unique insights that really help you do anything. To me, it's really just... the belief that timeless advice is actually timeless for a reason. So many people are trying to reinvent the wheel. They're trying to find some new shortcut or some new way of doing something. But in my experience, following that timeless advice of working hard for long periods of time and trying to do right by other people has been kind of a winning formula.
I think to understand where you are today and all the successes you've had, it's important to understand your early context. I was listening to a story you shared on My First Million back in 8th grade when September 11th happened back in 2001. Can you take me back to that moment in time and how that shaped you and who you are as a person?
Yeah. I mean, I was in 8th grade, 9/11 happens. I remember walking into one of the classrooms in the school, and I can't remember if I was going to get somebody or something or whatever, but I remember that the teacher basically like ushered me out very quickly out of the room, and I was like, what's going on? And she was telling her class something, but didn't want, other people outside of the classroom to hear. So I remember going back to my classroom and being like, what's going on? And the teachers were all very frantic or whatever. And so obviously we eventually figure out that 9/11 happened and the school shut down. And this is North Carolina, but there's a lot of families from kind of New York, New Jersey. They had parents come get the kids and bring them home. And I remember I went home and I was talking to my dad, and I was in 8th grade, so I wasn't a little kid, but I also didn't really have the kind of global context. I remember just saying something to the effect of like, what happened? And he basically said, some people tried to kill Americans today. And I could just tell that there was like a gravity to what he was saying. And he said, and America's probably going to fight back. And I remember thinking, I don't really know what that means, but like, that's a pretty significant moment in history. And within, days, obviously we start going back to school, people all start talking about this, whatever. It just became very apparent to me. Like that was the first time I think I was exposed to kind of true evil in the world, that maybe there was places in the world that they didn't look at the American way of life as, kind of a shining light on the hill, but instead they actually looked at it as a threat, as something that, stood for the demise of their way of life. And, from there, I think it just kind of changed maybe the view I had of a lot of, current events as I lived through them, but also, gave me much more kind of global perspective than, I had growing up as, an American in the United States.
Is that why you eventually joined the military or the U.S. Army when you were 17, or what was the...
I think that was a part of it. When you're in 8th grade till you're 17, like you got a little time to, cool off, if you will, no matter how mad you are in 8th grade. I don't even know if I was necessarily mad because I don't think I really fully understood the gravity of the situation. But definitely I think that was one piece of it. Probably the single most like impactful part of me deciding to join the military, outside of just like, hey, I think this will be good for me. I actually, kind of like the personal challenge of like, can I go do this stuff? There's an element of like, they're going to pay me money. Also it looks kind of fun. You're going to like jump out of planes and shoot guns and like do all these things that like, I can't believe they're going to let us do type thing, was Pat Tillman. And so, I was playing football in high school. I knew I was going to go play in college. Pat Tillman had been playing in college, was in the NFL. He walked away from an NFL contract of a couple $1 million to sign up to go be in the Army Rangers. And I remember saying to myself, here's a guy who, if I take kind of this football thing to, kind of the full extent, and was fortunate enough to be good in high school, eventually be good in college, and could get to the NFL, and he basically is willing to walk away from that. Like, who am I to not want to, at least go kind of contribute in some way? And so when I walked into the recruiter's office, I just remember they were pretty surprised that somebody like me would be there. And I didn't know why. It's something that I'm really glad that I did, but also the time I did it was important. I'm 36 now, and there's guys I know that are still in the military. They always remind me that next year at 37, I would be retiring from the Army if I had stayed in for 20 years. But obviously I got out, but it reminds you that, it's a very physical job. It's a young man's game. Guys who are still doing it in their late 30s, early 40s, even late 40s. It's pretty impressive to see what they're doing.
Being in active duty can be a very dangerous scenario on the day-to-day basis. I remember you sharing on Lex Friedman's show that one day you're in a convoy and one of the vehicles in front of you just blows up out of nowhere. The cost of mistakes were very high at that time. When you entered the business world, was there a high pressure around the decisions you made when, for example, let's say, hey, we're trying to scale this business from 100K to $1 million or whatever it might be? Was there a high pressure around every decision you made because of that in the military? Or was it just, hey, let's try these things and see what happens?
Yeah. I've probably talked more about the military in the last, 3 years than I talked about the military in the first 10 years that I was out of the military or whatever. Right. And I think a lot of it was just, it was a really unique experience. I learned a lot, but I think in hindsight, I was kind of like processing it all. And so I didn't really think about it. And, there are times where it sounds almost insane, but like I kind of forgot about it. And I was just living my life and, kind of operating. You definitely take away certain lessons. One of those lessons is, I'll put more kind of from a leadership perspective. If you ever hear people talking to athletes and they're like, hey, when the pressure goes up, like their blood pressure goes down. Right? They kind of get locked in a zone. The military is that in a lot of ways. The specific incident that you're talking about, IED goes off, the entire team that was out there that day immediately reacted, like the training kicked in. And it was almost like you were going through motions and you weren't thinking about it. It was second nature. And so one, effective training, but two, you just were locked in, you were focused, you weren't thinking about the danger or, anything else. And so when you go through those experiences, it's kind of like getting exposed to an extreme. Everything else is pretty, desensitized in comparison. And so I don't know if I've ever felt a lot of pressure in, kind of the business world, but not because it's like, oh, we're not going to die today. So, it's not that big of a deal. I think it's just more so I look at a lot of the issues in businesses kind of puzzles and not really problems. And so if you look at them as puzzles, it's like, hey, there's a solution here. We just got to kind of figure it out. When you look at something as a problem, then a lot of times it can be like, well, I don't know if it can be solved. But, if you think of a puzzle, all the pieces are there. You just got to figure out the right combination of putting them together. And so it's more a thing around persistence and kind of time investment than it is, hey, actually, we might not be able to solve this. And so that kind of comparison of puzzles versus problems, I think really reduces stress. It really allows you to kind of approach it from like, I can come up with the solution as long as I put enough time and effort into this. And it's been something that's really helped me over the years.
Yeah, one of the guests we had on the podcast was this guy named Jacob Klug. He's a 20-year-old, runs a no-code development agency, completely bootstrapped, do 100K a month in revenue. You actually did something similar in college. You built a couple of businesses, one of which was a website development company. Why go into entrepreneurship and why build that type of company?
A lot of people don't even know I did that. Yeah, I wanted money. Right. Like I didn't have that much money and I needed money. And I was, trying to build my actual business at the time, but I knew that I needed cash flow as well. And the company wasn't cash flowing. And so I taught myself how to make websites on WordPress. I went to, local businesses, and I think that I was charging between like $3,000 to $5,000 to build these websites. And, I got a crash course in a service business where it's really difficult. They're constantly trying to please people. These people tend not to be that technologically oriented. So whenever there's an issue, they're calling you and they need it fixed immediately, whatever. But it was great because it had all of the ingredients of building bigger companies, and it was kind of a low risk way to do that. And, I was thinking about this the other day when I was talking to a friend. I've pretty much been building and running companies now for more than 20 years. I think that I've probably started my first companies, even though they might not have been thought that way, when I was like 12 or 13 years old. And so you just kind of continue to increase the ambition. You continue to kind of build and compound your skill set. And so what starts out as like shoveling, snow off driveways or cutting lawns, then turns into building websites for, local small businesses, which then turns into, kind of more tech oriented businesses. And you kind of just keep leveling up over the years. It really is just this long, multi-decade journey of learning. And as you acquire more knowledge, it gives you the confidence to kind of go bigger and bigger, which, hopefully won't be over for me for a long time.
You've talked about ambition. One of the things that you've shared in the past is that ambition can also kill companies. Why and when do you know whether to have less ambition rather than more?
You usually don't know. And I think that you have to be comfortable with whatever the degree of ambition that you have determines what team you build, how you fund the company, where the product is positioned, what part of the market you go after, who you see as the competition. All these components really are overlays or kind of downstream of what is your ambition. So if you want to, build a websites for local businesses, it's actually not that ambitious of a project, right? And so you don't have to have a lot of funding. You don't have to have a massive team of MIT engineers. You don't need to go after GoDaddy, right? Or whatever. You're kind of positioned in a certain part of the market. There's very specific kind of decisions that are off of, hey, I just want to be able to make a living and kind of go and build these websites. But then if you look at, maybe a company that I've invested in, Varda, they're going to go do, manufacturing in space. That's pretty ambitious, right? You need a lot of money. You do need those MIT engineers, right? You do need to actually go and disrupt, right, some pretty big players. And so it changes kind of the decisions that you make in building that company. And so the reason why I say that ambition kills a lot of companies is because somebody, usually the CEO and founder, has super high ambition, but they actually have all the other ingredients of a kind of lower ambition endeavor. And so by constantly chasing the high ambition idea with a low ambition team, funding, market positioning, product, etc., those two things don't match. And so it's kind of like, if you have a car and you just constantly drive it with your foot all the way down on the gas, eventually you just wear it thin, right? Like, the car isn't made to run at 120 miles an hour for months and months on end. And so I think that a lot of people now are starting to understand venture capital is a very specific type of business, a very specific kind of financing option to leverage. But there is quite a number of businesses. We've built a lot of businesses. I have a lot of friends who've built businesses who you can use these kind of digital skills or kind of, internet native approaches. But really what you're doing is you're building businesses that are profitable, that are able to kind of be repeatable and scalable, but you don't necessarily have to go for kind of this massive multi-billion-dollar outcome that costs, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding to be able to do. And so it's a question of like, are you playing a slugging percentage game or are you playing a batting average game? And I try to actually position myself to be able to play both in a unique way, but just knowing, which game am I playing? Where's the ambition level that I should be kind of following for the team that I have, the funding, the market positioning is pretty important.
If you were back in college today, what would be some of the businesses that you would think about potentially starting?
It depends on what your level of ambition is. But if you basically said, hey, look, I'm a college student who I want to learn. I want to be able to make some cash, and I want to be able to meet people, right? I actually think in college and kind of in your early 20s, the single most important thing that you can do is build your network, because if you do it right, those people will continue throughout your career as people that you can rely on for information, for partnerships and deals, for funding, and also if you're fortunate, we'll be able to find 2 or 3 people who'll be a great sounding board for you throughout your career. And there's this whole idea that people always want to meet their heroes, but actually you should spend more time with your peers, because if you go and you talk to your heroes, what they will talk about is calling their peers. And so your heroes are cool. Your heroes can teach you some things, but really the bulk of the time you spend in your business career is going to be with those peers. So spending that time to invest in those relationships is more important. In terms of ideas for businesses, I think that kind of creation is a key kind of theme. So creating websites, creating blogs, creating now podcast, creating social media content, being able to create video content, audio content. Anything that you can create for somebody else, specifically if you're a young person who understands these digital platforms in a way that they don't, somebody's going to be willing to pay you for it. Right. And so, they have an abundance of capital, but they have a lack of knowledge. You have an abundance of knowledge and a lack of capital. And so you put those 2 things together, and usually you're able to unlock capital by switching knowledge with them. So I think that's 1. 2 is I think young people drastically underestimate how valuable their knowledge is outside of creating stuff. So I've always thought somebody should create kind of a college intelligence service. So what do college kids eat? What do they use? What brands do they like? What services do they use? Could you put, some sort of app on everyone's phone so you could see what percentage usage of various things they're doing on their phones? So then you could sell that to hedge funds, or sell that to, people who want to understand better an entire demographic of society, right? That knowledge is really, really important. And you could start out pretty simply by just running surveys. Right? If you survey all the students at a school, you get a bunch of information, then you run around and you tell everyone, hey, I'll sell you the results of this. Right? Probably could be able to get some stuff. Another idea would be kind of research. One of the big things on the research side is that, again, you have an abundance of time as a young person. And so if you have time and you understand how to use the internet in terms of being able to look things up, you should be able to put those 2 things together to do research for people who don't have time. And so whether it's executives, C-suite, investors, whoever, going to them and saying, hey, pay me $5,000 a month and I will create research reports on whatever topics you give me. I'll create 1 a week or something, and they're super well done, make them look really nice, right? Somebody's going to pay you to do that type of stuff. And then one of the things I did in college, which I would not suggest other people do, but it was a fantastic experience for me, was I started trading, and learning how the market works by having skin in the game is incredibly valuable. Now, it's not necessarily aligned with entrepreneurship in the traditional sense because you're not building a business, but understanding why does the market move? When I risk capital, I can win and lose. Why is it happening, right? It just naturally forces you to better understand so much about the economy, about financial markets, about risk. And so I do think there's an element of when you're young, investing some money, but it has to be money that you're willing to lose and be okay with, because you're probably going to lose it, right? So, as a kid, I remember thinking to myself, if I'm willing to pay for school or whatever, you might want to pay for a little bit of self-education in financial markets as well. So there's all kinds of ideas. And again, I don't think that if you're a college student, being above shoveling driveways, cutting grass, doing anything like that is a bad idea either. It's just kind of what are you interested in, and what would you be enthusiastic about doing, day after day after day for a long period of time, and just go get started.
Yeah, I really like your idea on selling knowledge. So about 1.5 years ago, I met this guy named Noam Bardeen, who was the former CEO of Waze. He ended up founding this company called Post. The company didn't end up working out, but it was trying to be this new news app. So I'm like, hey, I'll survey a bunch of kids at my school. I'll get you a bunch of data, and then you can use that data. Of course, I didn't have the foresight or the knowledge at the time to actually sell that data, but I went ahead and did it after probably speaking to or getting it in front of maybe 100, 120 people, 80, 90 people filled out the survey, which is incredibly high. It was a great thing. I think it's definitely something that students could do. A few years after school, when you're 25 years old, you were on a plane in 2014 and you read a book that changed your life forever. What was that book and how did it change your life?
The book was The Art of Product Management. And I would have never bought the book, read the book, other than I was on the way to an interview as a product manager at Facebook. I had no clue what the product manager role was. I'd never been a product manager before, and I figured I probably should, go be prepared for the interview, which was shocking, frankly, to my parents and anyone who knew me, because I wasn't prepared for pretty much any other test I'd ever taken in my life in school. But I knew that, hey, this is a pretty big deal, and if I could get this job, there's kind of a trajectory change in my life here, I didn't know anything else other than to go and just read a book. I got the idea, and I don't know if I've ever actually even told him this, but I got the idea because I had read that Mark Cuban, before he started his first company, he was working in a computer store, and he would take the manuals home at night and he would read them. And he became the most knowledgeable person in the computer shop because he was the only person willing to just read the manuals. And so he knew everything about every component, every piece, every computer or whatever. And so eventually that led to him having the confidence to quit the job and go and start his own company. And so if I want to be a product manager and I don't know anything about it, then I don't even know other product managers, right? So I can call up a friend and say, hey, what should I say? So I bought the book after kind of Googling around a little bit, and it's the best recommended book. When I went into the interview, I remember saying to myself, the best shot I got at getting this job is to just repeat back what was in that book, because I don't know anything else. And so thankfully for that book, I was able to get the job. But it was a great kind of lesson, because not only had I read about, Mark Cuban doing this, then I did it. And I can't tell you how many times since then I have, bought a book and said, I know nothing about this thing, but I'm just going to read the book, and I bet you I'm going to learn about that thing. And so, there's a business that we've been looking at purchasing for a while. And literally they're in an industry where I didn't know that much. And so I went and I bought the For Dummies book on that industry. And somebody here at the office saw me with the book, and they were like, why do you have, this for dummies? And I said, well, I don't know anything about that industry, but I'm going to know a lot about that industry after I read that book. And it's this idea of, are you the type of person who wants everyone to think you're smart and like you know everything? Or are you the type of person who is willing to say, if I don't know something, it's a sign of intelligence to then identify I don't know this and let me go get the knowledge, right? And so, thankfully at 25, I was able to do that because it really proved to me like this is just a simple kind of life hack, like just go read the book, and something I've carried, for years since and continue to do.
One of the partners or venture capital partners I interviewed, which was the first in-person interview we did, was this guy named Jason Schumann. So he's a partner at Primary, and he said that the smartest people, even if they don't know the answer, they're willing to say that they don't know the answer and then speak to experts in the space and get back to an answer within 48 hours. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed some of the most successful entrepreneurs and also people can do in general, is that if you don't know the industry, don't know the answer, you're willing to do the research, you're willing to put in the homework. And that's one of the things I admire about Mark Cuban, who is a guest of the show, is yes, he spent a lot of time reading the manuals for broadcast.com, building out that company, but also he entered the pharmaceutical industry. He had no experience in pharmaceuticals before entering that industry, but then said, hey, I'm going to be one of the smartest people in this industry and I'm going to build a company around it. And I think people who are able to not only out research, but also outwork and then outsell, that is a very powerful combination.
I don't think anyone knows this, but in 2017, there was a gentleman who worked at Mark Cuban's kind of investment firm / family office. And I remember talking to him and I said, what are you guys doing? And he told me that they were reading white papers and books on artificial intelligence and neural nets. I remember saying, what? Like, Mark Cuban's got $1 billion. What is he doing? And he's like, yeah, he thinks that this space is going to be really big. And he's literally reading from scratch, what's a neural net? How does it work? Whatever. Fast forward 7, 8, 9 years, looks pretty smart to have been doing that, right? And so I do think that one of the beauties of kind of being willing to go get knowledge is that it energizes you every time you don't know something. You're like, oh, I know the playbook, right? Like I know how to go get the knowledge. And so just put the time in, you go and you do it. It is incredibly empowering versus there's probably plenty of people who are stuck in positions in their life where like, I don't know this thing, and they've never seen the power of just going and reading the book or talking to the experts. And so they're kind of, searching in the dark a little bit. And so my suggestion to people always is just go buy the book, man. Just, it's a great investment. It's $20, buy the book, read it. You're going to be way better off.
So you ended up getting that job at Facebook. Were there any frameworks that you learned at Facebook that you ended up implementing either in your investing career or when trying to build companies?
And there's a ton. That place still is probably very special. One of the things was just incredibly high quality people. The operational tempo was very fast. And there was a focus just on kind of results. One of the frameworks that I catch myself repeating over and over again to founders is on the growth team, we would be very clear about what we were testing. And then we would focus, maniacally on making sure we ran the test perfectly. And the reason why you want to run the test perfectly is because if you run a test and it doesn't work, but you didn't run it perfectly, then you're left wondering, is it that this doesn't work? Or is it that we just ran the test the wrong way? But if you always execute perfectly on the test, then it's either works or it doesn't work because of what you're testing. And so how do you always make sure there's clarity in kind of the test result? You have to execute perfectly. And so you can apply that to a lot of things in your life, right? But kind of, very clear, perfect execution is a huge one. I would say another thing that I learned is just getting high quality people in a room is pretty powerful, but also to letting those people kind of run and saying, look, rather than everything be approval based, instead, what we're going to do is we're going to let you guys be great. And if anyone kind of steps out of bounds, then we'll say something. But just like you guys know what the mission is, right? You know what the North Star is. Go. One, it's empowering for the people. But two is people start doing all kinds of crazy stuff that you never would have thought of, right? There's no kind of, central brain trust that could have come up with these ideas. It ends up being the line engineer who's sitting there, late one day and is like, it'd be cool, right? Create something. And all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, that's awesome, right? And so I think that's been a huge, huge thing. And then maybe one other one that I think is just like pretty cool. People at Facebook measured everything. And so there was at one point, Facebook was trying to figure out how do we increase like the NPS, right, that people had. But rather than use NPS, they created their own internal score, which was a survey question. Facebook cares about its users. And they would ask you, how strongly do you agree with this statement? And you rank it 1 to 5. And so they were trying to move this metric and they couldn't move it. What
was the number?
I don't know. Maybe it was at like 62. So they would take 1 through 5 and they would extrapolate it out or whatever, right? But like maybe it was like 62 or something. And one day they put a kind of like a card in the feed at the top, and whoever was the content writer or the designer signed the message from all of us at Facebook. And they put it into the testing system. It came back and this metric moved. And it was like a celebration. And everyone was so excited that the metric finally moved. We had quantifiably been able to change the sentiment that people had towards Facebook, whatever. And what it did was it humanized the company. It was this very clinical, you're interacting with Facebook. But when it says from all of us at Facebook, you make it feel like, oh, there's humans behind this site. And so, that was cool and clever or whatever. But to me, the lesson was, man, these guys can quantify anything, right? Literally anything. They will figure out a way to measure it. And if you measure it, you then have a chance to move it. And so seeing that kind of in one of the like softest, least quantifiable, parts of business, which is this like sentiment and kind of like NPS type stuff, really, really showed me no matter what you're working on, there's a way to put numbers to it. And if you're able to get numbers on it, then you should be able to do a lot of testing that could lead to the outcome that you want.
Yeah, I think that's something that sometimes people forget, is that at the end of the day, we're still all humans. We still like connecting with other humans. And I think that's really important. Bitcoin is, although one of the things you're known most publicly for, you've also done some really cool stuff that has nothing to do with blockchain technology. One of the more boring businesses that you're excited about today are these line striping businesses for roads. Why and how big of a role do you think they actually play in the future of our transportation?
So let me give some context on kind of all these boring businesses, which is in the United States, 50% of jobs come from small, medium-sized businesses. You can think of these as, businesses that are like not in the tech economy, right? These are businesses that are kind of more blue collar oriented, Main Street type businesses. And they really are the backbone of America. And what I find unique about them is if you're like a solo entrepreneur in kind of the tech world, you basically are part of the laptop class. You go to a coffee shop, you drink your iced coffee, you write an email or something, you get paid some money, then you go to your cycling class, right? And you kind of go out with your friends. Like it's pretty cake, life. Yeah. Nothing wrong with it. More power to those people, right? But the solo entrepreneur in like kind of the blue collar industry or in Main Street business, like they open their shop at 7 a.m. They're physically there, right? Usually their family is running it. So their wife or their kids or, whatever is there. They're on their feet all day. They close at 7 p.m. Right? They're physically moving goods around. They're dealing with customers. If you run like a digital business, like, let's say you have a Substack or something, when people have complaints, they like send an email, right? Or they request a refund. Like you don't even know their name, right? It's this very like impersonal thing, whatever. If you're like a local business and someone's got a problem, they like come into the store and they yell at you. Right. And by the way, you have to like smile and take it and be like, I'm so sorry that happened. Let us, correct it. Let's fix it, whatever. So it's just like a very different experience, I think, than a lot of people in the tech industry. But a lot of these businesses also, they struggle with things that maybe we take for granted in the tech industry: marketing, sales, product development, even internal systems, right? I recently went and I visited a manufacturing type business, and we were walking on the floor, and it blew my mind because everyone had headphones on. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, that's the podcast audience.
Yeah.
I don't know what podcasts they're listening to, right? Or music, but these people are sitting here on this manufacturing and kind of factory floor, and they're working, but for, 8-hour shift, they're consuming audio content. And so we don't think of that in the tech industry. I record a podcast. I don't think about the person, sitting there on the factory floor, but like that is some of the people who are consuming it. And so when you see these businesses, there's a lot of opportunity where you can kind of go in, I think, and help. Now, line striping in particular, my interest there is if you believe self-driving cars are going to be popular in the future, then understanding the technology they use. Some of them use LiDAR, some of them use computer vision. The computer vision cars, they literally see the lines on the road. The more the lines are painted well, the easier it is to see. The easier it is to see, the safer it is. And so it's a tech trend, but it is an area where it's really, really hard to disrupt the line painting businesses. And they tend to be very fragmented, and they tend to get long-term contracts. There's a lot of elements to those businesses that are unique. I've talked to a bunch of them. It's incredibly hard to get a deal done. We've tried to buy multiple businesses, and you're just dealing with, people who haven't done a lot of deals before. You're dealing with people who may have been working on these businesses. One of the businesses I talked to, I think the guy had been working on it for 24 years. Here it comes, idiot internet guy, right, who wants to buy my business. Like, why would I sell to you? Right. Well, you're like, well, I'm going to pay you some money. He's like, well, how much money? Right. And you're kind of going through this whole thing. And then you got to figure out, if you buy the business, how are you going to run the business? Right. Am I going to go and operate the line striping, machine? Probably not. How am I going to be able to manage the people who are doing that? Do we have an operating partner who goes and does that, right? How are they going to be able to do it? And so there's a lot of complexity in doing this, but I do think there's a really, really big opportunity there to look at these tech trends as they're occurring and then go figure out what is the pieces of this blue collar manufacturing or industrial world that plays into those tech trends and say, look, I understand the tech trend because of the tech industry experience, but I also want to be able to participate in kind of the physical world economy in a unique way that can help support these tech trends as they occur. Line striping being one of them, many, many other, I think, examples that we've been looking at.
Why do you think it is so difficult to buy those types of businesses?
Well, think of maybe the extremes. So in the tech world, let's say that you were creating you were going to make a dating app or something, right? And you said, I'm going to go raise capital, which is basically you're going to do a financing deal, right? You would come to me and you'd say, okay, I made my nice, 7-slide deck here. I meet you. I forget who said it one time, but somebody said angel investing in kind of early stage venture capital. It's just young dudes flirting with old dudes, right? Like, which I always thought was like a hilarious generalization. But like, there's some conversation, and then for the quote unquote documents, it's just, oh, we're going to use the YC safe. So there's already agreement on it from an industry perspective on like all the terms. And then there's this element of like the person investing the money is expecting to lose the money. So like they don't do diligence in an angel investment, right? Like they talk to the founder like, okay, I'm in, sign the document, wire the money, I hope it works, which is very rare. When you go and you buy a business, you start out literally with, why do you want to sell the business? What do I not know? Right? And them saying, why do you want to buy the business? Like, what do I not know? You know what I mean? So you're already starting out with like distrust almost, and everyone's kind of figuring out like, why would we do this? And so there's almost like you're sitting on different sides of the table. Whereas when you're an angel investor and a founder, you actually are making a decision to end up on the same side of the table because you're going to go forward and build a company together. And so I think that's one is just like the point at which you're arriving at the deal. The second is there is no YC safe. You're literally negotiating every single point. And there's a lot of things in there that obviously become sticking points and people have to get comfortable with. The third is you're buying control. It's much easier to, okay, here's, $50K and basically I own such a small portion of the company that, I have no say. If you're going to own the business, things like, well, if I sell you my business, what are you going to do with my people? I'm not even going to be involved anymore, but these people have worked for me for 15 years. I know their families. I know their kids. I literally remember when their kids were born, right? We celebrate their birthdays at the factory floor. Like, what's going to happen to them? There's a business that we looked at recently, kind of in the manufacturing space. They're one of the largest employers in a very small town in Kentucky. And so if you do something to that business, literally that town could feel, kind of negative impact. And so I think there's, just kind of other aspects that aren't included in these like tech deals. And the last thing is just like, how do you agree on price? One of the crazy things is a lot of people, especially private equity folks that I talk to and try to learn from, a lot of spreadsheets. Well, here's what the business does. Here's a multiple. Here's what we think it's worth. And frankly, there's a lot of business owners that just say, I don't care about your spreadsheet. I got a number in my head. You either pay me the number or I'm not selling. And so you have somebody who's trying to be a rational economic actor, and you got somebody who's, more kind of emotionally thinking through, they just pick the number out of thin air and this is the number they want. Sometimes those people can meet and agree. A lot of times they can't. And so it's just a harder deal, I think, to do than, maybe in the tech industry, we're just like very spoiled because we figured out YC safe. There's this, kind of minority investment interest. We end up on the same side of the table. It's very much a like, how do I pay it forward? Right. And so maybe we should be fortunate, to kind of be in an industry where those things are true.
So you're spending some time focusing on the line striping businesses, mainly because you see that autonomous driving will become a big thing. AI is also something that a lot of people are focusing on and investing in now. Are there any boring businesses or niches under that subset that people should be paying more attention to that will also become big because the AI wave will become big?
Well, back in 2016, 2017, we had a business where we started out first with GPU mining. So we were mining ETH to start. And, started out very small, grew a little bit bigger. My partner, Jason Williams, had a business that he was running, which takes car tires, turns it into electricity. And so it, breaks down these car tires and gets a bunch of kind of commodity outputs, and then is able to generate power. That power they could then sell into the grid. We said, well, rather than just sell it into the grid, why don't we also mine right here, on site? And so we started kind of getting a little bit, kind of deeper into this. And then my father had been in the data center business for a long time. And so we started saying, well, hold on a second, you have data centers. There's this mining thing. We also see these GPUs being valuable in terms of self-driving cars, 3D rendering, DNA sequencing, like all this kind of stuff. So I have a tweet back in 2017, I think it is, where I say, the world runs on CPUs today. Eventually it'll run on GPUs. Probably one of my most prescient tweets. And I did absolutely nothing. I didn't buy NVIDIA stock. I didn't, just so crazy.
NVIDIA.
well, so, at the time we were operating this business. And so, we clearly saw where the world was going. I think that, if I could go back, probably out of many of the businesses that we've operated, run, acquired over the years, that business, I wish that we had kind of spent more time, put more energy into, and really kind of pushed further, because today, what is kind of the physical world, kind of support of AI, own the data centers. Right, would be an amazing business. And so, lesson learned, right? You kind of you live and you move on. But I think that every tech trend, you definitely can find these real world businesses or opportunities that kind of support them.
How much money did that business end up making?
That business?
Yeah.
Well, we early on we mined a decent amount of Ethereum, and then I was real smart. I started mining at like $8. And I sold it all at 150. So we made a decent amount of money, but not anywhere near. Today I think Ether trades at $2,400. So you sold it at 150. You kind of you only cut yourself short by whatever.
Well, it's also hard to predict though what the real ceiling is. Yeah,
there's two ways to look at it. Right? Is, oh my God, look how dumb I am. Which I kind of think look how dumb I was. I sold it at $150. But also, it gave me capital that I otherwise wouldn't have had, that I then went and used, right? And some of that capital ended up being capital I used to buy Bitcoin at $3,000, right? And $3,000 is now, $60K. Yeah. So you kind of live and you learn, and it's impossible to predict what would have happened. So I just try not to spend any time on, that stuff, and just say, look, what are the lessons I got to take from those situations, and, use them to apply moving forward.
Out of all the businesses that you spent time with, invested in, built, what do you think most entrepreneurs get wrong when trying to scale their business?
There's a lot of founders who they dream, but they don't have goals, which is really hard. If I had to say, it's hard to kind of break through to where you got a business. Right. You kind of have an idea, but to get a real business going, you can't be a dreamer. You really have to have kind of goals and a plan to get there. So I would say a lot, just from an aggregate number of people who want to start a business, they get stuck in kind of dreams, not goals. Of those that break through and kind of get to a business, then I would say really there's kind of two things. One is, can they get the right team? And, some people can kind of get it right for the first iteration of the business, but in order to scale past that, you got to kind of upgrade the team, and they might have difficulty doing that or whatever. So I think that kind of each stage of the business provides, new challenges. And then another thing I see a lot of founders, I think maybe it's not a fatal mistake, but it definitely negatively impacts the business. They just operate without speed. And that speed, even with our businesses, I will talk with people and they'll say, okay, let's do X. And then I'll say, okay, when do you think you can get that done? And they'll say, it's Monday. How about by Wednesday? And I'll say, it's 12 o'clock. How about by 3 p.m.? And they're like, okay. And I'm like, why is our default that we're going to do it by Wednesday when, it's a 1 hour exercise? Just go do it right now. Right. And so I fall into the same thing, right? It's hard to always kind of be, on edge and, hey, let's just do it right now. But if I can instill that in the team and then they can instill it back in me and we hold each other accountable, you get just this kind of speed and this iteration that gives you an advantage. But I think it also signals kind of an offensive mindset that allows for you to kind of fight complacency, fight any sort of degradation in your organization. It keeps the culture really kind of vibrant and alive. I think that's probably the biggest thing. My buddy Sriram over at Andreessen Horowitz, he wrote a short blog post. I think he called it Clock Speed. Like, what's the clock speed in the organization, right? Yeah. And so maybe it's like having a low clock speed is, the big mistake that I see a lot of people make.
And not only are you successful, but you've also sat down with a lot of other successful people through your podcast, including Mark Cuban, Chamath Palihapitiya, David Sachs. What do you think are a few traits that separate these hyper successful billionaires from the average person?
I do think there is an element of ambition plays into it. I think likability is actually really, really important. And people kind of underestimate that. So when you spend time with a lot of these people, you kind of walk away and you're just like, that person's just fun to be around, right? And so if that's your personal experience, like obviously it probably people that they're hiring or trying to sell to or whatever have a similar type of experience and they just want to be around them. So that's important. I think things like working hard is kind of table stake. Like, of course they work hard. I do think that they probably have good ideas, and some of that's intelligence, some of that's creativity, some of that is just kind of being around and in the flow of things and kind of, figuring out how to put pieces together. And then there's a very interesting dynamic of, like, some people call it like contrarianism. I tend to think of it as high disagreeableness. I know that I have a high disagreeableness. My wife and I talk about it a lot because being married to someone with a high disagreeableness means when she suggests things, I immediately think no. And so I have to, sometimes remind myself, like, hey, this thing that is this amazing quality and, a huge advantage at work is probably a detriment at home. And so, like, how do you kind of like learn to turn it off a little bit? But I do think a lot of them have a high disagreeableness that they're able to kind of naturally just rely on.
Why is that an advantage?
Well, if you want normal results, then you kind of follow a normal path. But if you reject the normal path, then it opens you up for an opportunity to get abnormal results. And so the world is built to push people down a normal path with, realistic expectations, like the whole, like, be realistic, right? A highly disagreeable person just tells you, I am being realistic. Like, we're going to do whatever. And, maybe Elon is the extreme of this, if you kind of read about the way he operates, where he's just like, no, we're just going to do it in a year. And everyone else is like, it's going to take 20 years. He's like, we're going to do it in a year. And, like, maybe it actually takes 5 years. And so everyone will critique him and be like, well, he said 1, but it took 5. But, another way to look at it is like, well, everyone else said 20 and he did it in 5, right? But it's this disagreeableness with the consensus, it's disagreeableness with kind of the standard path. It's a disagreeableness with the normal result. And also, a lot of times, this high disagreeableness means somebody is stubborn. And so when they try something and it doesn't work, they kind of keep trying, right? And until they kind of figure it out. So I think that's like a really important quality that, again, positives and negatives to it, but a lot of these guys that I've met have.
And you have a book that comes out on September 24th called How to Live an Extraordinary Life. For someone listening to this podcast, what are some of the things that they can do today to level up their life?
Yeah. So the book is, a series of 65 letters that I wrote to my kids. I started writing these letters. My wife asked me when our first child was born, hey, can you write her a letter? Like, she'd love to read it, later. So I wrote a letter. And that letter was, frankly, like a dad writing to his first kid, just being like, this is awesome. I'm glad you're here, right? Like, there was no life advice. There was no, it was just like, this is cool. And I was super excited, whatever. And then I started to say, well, I never really thought that I was going to live past past 35. And it was somewhat maybe of like a joke as I was growing up. I used to joke that, I'm not going to live past 35, so I might as well get everything done now. And as I started to get closer to 35, I was like, oh, like I might have a shot to, kind of live past that. And so I said to myself, look, God forbid anything ever happened to me. Like, what would I want my kids to know? Right. And so I wrote one letter, I wrote two, I wrote four, and somewhere around, I don't know, 7 or 10 of them or so, I said, this maybe actually I should turn this into some sort of book so that not only my kids could read it, but other people could read it. And what I tried to put in the book were ideas that I personally had learned and implemented in my life. And, there's things in there such as when you're working at a job, I was at Facebook, I spent 2 years there. At the end of the first 2 years, I remember talking with my father, and he said, look, you can, keep working there. It's this amazing place. Just be careful that you don't work somewhere for 10 years, but you really only got 2 years of experience 5 times. Right? If you're going to learn 90% of the stuff that you're going to learn there in the first 2 years, but you stay for 10, you were dead. Yeah, you were dead for 8 years, right? Like, understand how much are you going to learn, and all this kind of stuff. So things like that. There's, a really good one is I've never seen a problem that can withstand a proper workout. So if you ever think about problems that you have in your life, if you're really stressed about something or really worried about something, normally what will happen is if you go and you kind of put a max effort workout in, regardless of what max effort is for you. You want to go run, if you want to lift weights, whatever. Usually what will happen is because of the physiological changes in your body, you are better suited to actually solve the problem or kind of deal with the stress, et cetera. And so there's a lot of kind of health and oriented type advice in the book. And then I think that there's a lot of stuff in terms of personal relationships. One of the things that I think people kind of forget about is we live in a world where everything you do is about relationships. And how do you, maintain good personal relationships, business relationships? There's a whole slew of things that I've learned over the years. And so, trying to impart that on my children is important. But I wrote the letters in a way that my kids are young today. I want them to be able to read this when they start to read, but I also want them to be able to read it when they're 25, 30, 40 years old. So how do you kind of write it in a way where it makes it as timeless as possible was somewhat of a challenge, but hopefully comes through the book.
And before we wrap it up, we have a couple of closing questions. One is, what's the best investment you've ever made?
Best investment I ever made is by far my family. When I think about what do I get the most kind of joy out of, and happiness, spending time with my family. If I think about the thing that I spend the most amount of time doing, it's with my family. And it is probably the thing that, will pay off dividends, throughout my entire life. Whereas any one individual financial investment or whatever has kind of got a life to it. And so it's a weird way to think about it because when people are asked about investing, usually they think about like, where did I put dollars? I think about where did I put time, and time being the kind of more scarce, more valuable asset. And if you look at family as kind of like the best investment, it also means that if you can make your biggest investment your best investment, that's like a grand slam in life. And so I've been able to do that, and, very fortunate to be in that position.
And second, what's your greatest failure and what did you learn from it?
My greatest failure? In 4th grade, I was on the playground. Now I'm playing. The soccer goal was there. I just missed the kick.
The kick, lost the game. Championships were over.
I wish I had that good of a memory. No, my biggest mistake. I think when I was younger, it probably was just like I didn't understand the power of constantly being the student. I was so desperate to want to, get respect from my peers or people. I was so desperate to, be in a position where folks were like, oh, this guy, like he got it. He's smart. He's successful, whatever. That when you're young and you don't have the substance yet, you kind of puff your chest out, right? And you're like, no, I'm good. Like, don't I'm amazing. And then as you get older, I think I heard once somebody said, successful people spend all their time feigning stupidity. because they just want to sit around and talk about their mistakes, because it actually shows that, they're so wise, they're so experienced that they don't have to talk about the successes. They just spend all their time talking about the failures. And that shows that they learned all these lessons. And so I do notice that, myself and peers, as we've gotten older, I kind of don't care. Like, people think whatever they want about me, like whatever, I know what I did, and so if I could go back, I think that I would just kind of take more of a student approach, from day one, and I probably would have more knowledge and be, even better situation.
And lastly, if I slid you over a phone and you could call your 20-year-old self, would you call? And if so, what would you say?
Yeah, I definitely call. At 20, I was in the desert in Iraq, and I had my 21st birthday there. And I probably, it's not so bad, but like, I'd probably call and talk shit to myself and just be like, hey dude, keep your fucking head down. Right? Like, you're gonna be okay, but whatever. But no, if I had to like give advice to my younger self in general, it probably would really just be focused on, you're going to figure it out. Like, stop worrying about it, right? Like, you're going to figure it out. You're going to end up finding success. Enjoy life. Like, don't be so, kind of like concerned with doing it. And maybe I wouldn't have actually found success if I hadn't been concerned about it. I don't know. I didn't get the chance to run that version of, kind of simulation. But yeah, I think just chill out, right? Just enjoy life, and all will be good in the world. Probably be the advice that I would have given myself.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great way to end it. Thanks, Anthony, for taking the time to join the show. We'll have a link to all of our socials and Anthony's socials in the episode description down below. You can follow him on X or Twitter. And thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for doing it.